Hi, everyone, and welcome to Design Reality's Interesting People podcast. This is our very first of the series, and we are talking to a very interesting person, Anselm Hook. In this conversation, we touched on how he got his beginnings in Xerox Parc and was involved in doing computer vision and AR research. And then he went on to found and start multiple startups, including 60.ai. We went in to explore his work in R&D at Mozilla, focused on XR, and his upcoming conference that he's doing called The Future of the Browser. And it's a really interesting conversation that we had, and we got his takes on where the future of these technologies are going and how we're going to be able to keep them human and keep them focused in the direction that we all hope for the near future. So I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. And with that, let's get started.
I'm super excited to be here with everyone. Today's speaker is a friend from Portland, Oregon, and someone whose work I've always just had a tremendous amount of respect for. So with that, I'll introduce Anselm Hook, is a multidisciplinary developer who has worked on multiple XR startup projects, including being involved in a Samsung Accelerator. He's worked with teams of artists, programmers, and computer vision experts whose focus was in building a design grammar for UX and AR. He has been a mentor at the MacArthur Foundation, funded Producers Institute for New Media Technologies, and at the Sundance New Frontier Story Lab. In the past, he has worked at Xerox Parc, and most recently, he was in the R&D for the Mozilla Emerging Technologies Group, focused on XR. We're really excited to have you here today with us, Anselm. And so I'd love for you to introduce yourself more thoroughly and to share with us a bit about how you came to be here today.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Gosh, how did I come here? It's been a long journey of many years. I would say that obviously your work with all the design meetups and the XR work overlaps with what I've been doing. So I think our larger community kind of brings us all together. I think that perhaps we're all sharing the same passion for the future, in a sense. We're imagining these future interfaces, ways that we can make things easier. Maybe there's things that really irritate us about our tools. And I think it's a natural behavior of creatives is to try to ideate and fix things, make the world better. So that's I think my position.
Great. Yeah, no, I completely agree. You know, I think we've had this conversation a couple times about our shared mission to really keep technology human. And so I know you've been working in technology for a long time. I'm curious, how did you get into the XR space or the AR VR space? Like, where did that interest for you come, and how has that developed over the years?
It's really funny. It's actually a question worth asking you as well. It's for me, I was almost the last person to participate in this space of all my friends. I was a long time hardcore 3D video game developer. I did lots of large games. I worked for Electronic Arts. Most of my career is still, and it's been, I've been working for a long time, but still the majority of my career was video games. And what was interesting is I suddenly kind of had this turning point. I guess I would say it was probably when I saw Bruce Sterling talk in 2000 at a conference called Planet Work. And he started talking about what we could do as programmers to do social for good, have an impact on the world. And I kind of pivoted away from just making pure games to focusing on deeper implications. And I was very interested in helping us understand our own places, understand the neighborhoods, communities we're in, see through the walls in a sense, metaphorically speaking. And so if you take that kind of desire to know your place and you combine that with 3D graphics, you kind of end up with XR, augmented reality, overlays, mixed reality. It's a natural outcome of that desire to decorate the world with more information. And being a technical guy, I started pursuing that pretty hard. Yeah.
And so can you tell us, when you say you started pursuing that pretty hard, what did that look like for you? Like, how did you pivot from, being a video game developer, working at EA? I'm curious what are some of the biggest games you worked on, but that's for another conversation. So how, what did that pivot look like for you? Like, how did you dive deep into the AR space?
Yeah, it's a funny story, because most of the developers I know tend to get kind of burned out, or they just kind of stick with the one thing. And video games is hard enough, right? Like, why would you then add more? But I guess for me, what happened is I just started talking about it. I didn't initially start writing apps, because back then the tools were so poor. What I did do, though, was I caught the attention of Xerox Parc, which is a very prestigious research lab in Silicon Valley, and they hired me as not quite entrepreneur in residence, but they wanted me to come on board as a commercial retail mass market developer, to bring my kind of commercial retail expertise. And I'd been in lots of small startups. The games industry is very challenging, and so I went to Parc because they had a playground. I could play with all their toys, and ideally there was going to be some knowledge or information exchange with how to commercialize and sell the toys. And not to ramble on too much about that, but I didn't find that to be, research labs are great, but I wanted to actually ship. I wanted to ship product. And so I then did a series of small startups, Deco, which was moderately well known for doing an 3D XR app, and then Liminal, which was 3D glasses sponsored by Samsung, funded inside of Samsung Accelerator. And then finally, I worked on the initial pieces of 60.ai, and that was later acquired by Niantic. So I was in actually I was working with the same guy, Matt Meisniks, for all three companies. And I kind of stepped off the boat on the last project and went to do my own things. And they had a very successful acquisition. And that kind of, I think, marks that era of XR where we finally deployed the technology. And now we can think about implications, not just the tech, which was so hard.
That's great. So you spent a little time at Xerox, really getting to play and research,
Yeah.
realized that you wanted to build products, and that's when you met Matt, and kind of worked on those for a few years. So you're very succinct. It sounds like all that happened in the span of maybe 6 months or something. What was that time? What was that time frame?
Years. Incredibly hard work, incredibly hard hill climb. Being self-taught, I just don't have the kind of academic skills that my peers have. I'm pretty good at turning papers into code and filing patents and such like. But I worked with people who are absolutely brilliant, who just could see through the math. And I'm a little bit more blue collar. I would take the incredible thinking and build code around it, or find shortcuts. Often there was like a little bit of it's a complementary skill, because I would be like, how do we ship this thing? And they'd be like, well, this beautiful theory will work like this. I'm like, well, can we do a cut down version that will fit on the iPhone? So that hands-on process was years and years of work, developing a deep understanding of computer vision, 3D reconstruction and tracking. That whole knowledge base, probably never use again now. It's well packaged in libraries and tools, but that was practically an entire college degree, just that research.
Yeah, thanks for speaking to that, because I think a lot of people just don't really understand how much work has gone into building these technologies.
Yeah.
And so they hear, like I said, your story is very succinct. So it's like, oh, maybe that was like, a year or 2 years worth of work. And it's like, no. That was
incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Incredible. It's in your bones. You feel the pain of those years where you're just grinding, doing things that are really, really hard. And then eventually the whole industry moves forward, and all the tools become just libraries you can call. And it's such a release when you can actually now focus on what you wanted to do, which was basically like stick a virtual Post-it note on a wall.
Yeah, it starts with something simple, like, oh, I want to just do this simple thing, and then all of a sudden it's close to 10 years of your life, and you're like, oh, exactly. I finally do that thing. Yeah. Well, I don't want to dominate the conversation, so I'm gonna let Nisha jump here and ask a question. But real quick, I'm just curious, like, this technology that you put so much work into, where are some of the places that people are going to see the implications of all that research and all that work? Like, because now it exists, the libraries are out there. So it's like, I'm just curious, you've been behind the scenes, so to speak, how has your work influenced that?
Well, so I have my own opinions. I know you both have done a lot of research in this space too and looked at it. And actually kind of some of it is I kind of myself I want to kind of ask a wider community as well. But my own position on this is that the idea of sitting over a computer interface or over a phone it's a kind of a 10, 15-year experiment. Mobile phones certainly are now 12 years as we know them. And the sit down computers are maybe 30 years. So that's been an experiment on a generation of us as humans. And I don't think that that's been successful, really. People are glued to their devices, but it's a very unnatural gluing. Everywhere you go, 24 hours a day, buses, walking, at home, in bed with your partner, everyone's on their phone. And it's because the phone is such an incredibly rich input device. It lets us, it's like living multiple lifetimes, right? And you get this incredible power of leverage and scope and breadth. But the physicality of it is that you're bent over this thing. Or even when you're programming, and for me as a programmer, that can be hard, like just typing and looking at a computer. For all of us, I think there's a new future for us. And speaking to your question, I think that future is a look up, see through future, not a look down, look at future. And I think we all feel that. But then the question is, what are the specific apps and experiences that we're all going to be using? And for me, that's more a question rather than anything I know as an answer. I just can see the capabilities where we can now really work together and see each other's work visually instead of kind of in this hermetic private world. And then really it becomes a question, okay, so what can we do when we can actually work together on virtual digital artifacts, not just on, like people will do barn raising in the real world together, build a barn together in a day sprint, or you'll go to, set up a campsite with your friends really fast or help them fix their house. But what does it mean when we can work on digital things together with that same ease? And when our children can watch us working on them? Like, what does it mean when it's transparent? And that's again more a question. But I see a future of transparent, embedded, easy to use tools that less require like a priesthood of expertise to use.
I think that's many great points that you bring up, especially about how, it's very unnatural to be staring down at our phones as far as the evolution of humanity goes, and having this space that is more collaborative, and it is about coming back to working with one another in the digital space in real time and having it be right in front of us. It's a very cool vision for the future that I think, a lot of people are wanting more and more as they feel they're searching for community and collaboration in this space, but it still is that level of you're not really interacting with each other. So I like that point, and I can hear the excitement in your voice about the future. And so I'm curious what projects you're currently working on in the XR space that you're feeling excited about.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Okay, so for me, I had been helping a company here in town called UAR about a year ago, and still ongoing a little bit, doing it's their tech and their ideas, doing a kind of Airbnb in a sense, where you could decorate your Airbnb with virtual Post-it notes to give hints to your guests about where the services were or how they work. You walk into a new space and it's hard to see and understand it. And this is kind of gives you that as if you'd already lived there for a year. You can see the markup on the space itself. A very simple app, but it's an example of the kind of use case that first level use case. More deeply, two projects. One is still in a beta. I'm calling it Sugar, and it's a game where you're in the real world and you walk around and you create little incentives for people to go places. So you might have a food cart and you might have extra donuts, right? And what I would like about when you invite people to come to a place is not that you're giving a discount, but you say, you come here and I'll give you a quarter, or I'll give you a donut, or I'll give you a thing for your labor. And so this is a game of real world game where you're kind of using an augmented reality interaction to find the place and then get the small reward. but it's a more game of like load balancing wants and haves. Like you might have an excess of something, or you might just want someone to help you garden, or maybe you're stuck on the side of a freeway with a flat tire, or maybe you have a take back the night march or a farmer's market. And you can drop little tiny rewards or incentives to encourage people to come over and help. And they get a real reward. It's a small reward, but I'm playing with the load balancing of how incentives. So those are two examples of real world use cases that I'm exploring right now.
So I know sugar, as you describe it, it sounds like it's really at the intersection of what I know is one of your interests, which is markets and exchange, and how, potentially like a kind of future distributive financial system almost could work, right? Where there's this ability to cut out the middleman, which is often like the ad networks, right?
Right, exactly.
That's how traditionally the food cart would post an ad, like I've got fresh donuts, and
Right.
someone can see it because they're in that location.
Yeah.
And so, maybe you could share us a little bit more about that interest and that kind of work you're doing, because I know it's leading into, and this is our our next question is you're hosting a conference on the future of the browser, but I'm just really curious about these trains of thoughts when you're looking at the future of marketplaces.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I tend to try and look for points of leverage, and I think many of us feel kind of some frustration around non-optimal outcomes that we have as communities, where we all have well-intentioned meaning individually, but as a collective, we seem to end up in really bad places. The homeless problem in Portland for me is especially a good example. It's a thorny and troubling problem, and I try to think about how could we engage as a group to each of us do a little tiny bit to have some impact. And then you think about many of the services that exist right now for social interaction at large group scales. And if you think about the system as a whole, we have this kind of machinery. And let me clarify that with a metaphor, because it's always hard to talk in the abstract. In a jungle, a bird will make a certain bird call to warn other birds about a hawk or a predator. And we similarly live in a kind of jungle where we signal to each other across this very noisy landscape. And sometimes those signals are fake signals, especially when there's an incentive like an advertiser or some bait and switch. So we live in a world right now where advertisers kind of spam us with noise, and then we as kind of people run around, scurrying around, trying to respond to the signals. And it's very hard to see each other. And really, if I had a motive, it's just helping us see better. You can't get people to always do the right thing, but if you can get people to see what the issues are, then maybe there's a chance. So other examples of signaling services are things like Groupon, where Groupon will make one store very visible for a day, and then everyone will pour into the store and crush the store, and then nobody's happy. The store is, overloaded, the customers are frustrated. And so I think that there needs to be something in between. It needs to be smaller load balancing services for people to signal more clearly to each other in very noisy landscapes. And the secret, I think, is money. It sounds kind of dumb, but if you attach small amounts of money to things, all of a sudden it becomes very expensive for any one party to spam everybody else. And so we have a bit of a tension in our society with money, because money is kind of ugly. But I think there's this idea of money at the large scale and money at the close scale, or near field money and far field money. Money is a form of communication. And I think that using it in the right way with small incentives, where it's not really about that you're getting a payout, but more that the person's making the offer is having some cost, is a way to better improve the signaling mechanics of our systems. So that's kind of wrapping up a bunch of ideas together, but I'm seeing, I'm generally taking a systems approach, trying to find ways the best points to leverage on a system to help build better social engagement. And so that's where I ended up with that thinking.
That's fascinating. I know Nisha had something she wanted to jump in. I appreciate the way that you talk about these things, Anselm, because you really, like you said, it can be hard to talk about it in the abstract. So you bring in these analogies, but you really are looking at like the bigger underlying, it's almost like the kind of the meta language of society in a way, and trying to reframe the way that we think about these systems. So Nisha, I know you had a question you wanted to jump in with.
Yeah, I really appreciated the point that you were bringing in. And a lot of times when, myself or Joshua, we talk to people that maybe aren't in the XR space about what we do, a big apprehension, especially with augmented reality, is about that people are already being so bombarded with advertisements and with commercials and with all of these things. And is that just going to be the reality of augmented reality, is being constantly inundated with advertisements that we don't want? And so the piece that you brought in about the signaling and being able to really have the connections with the people that you want to, I think is a really important element to highlight within all of this. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, if it will, if we can shift the ship away from just purely all about being bombarded with advertisements and having true connections in the AR space.
Yeah, it's pretty scary when you think about it. I had the chance to hang out with Kichi, who did that video, hyper reality video, and he was echoing those fears. It's like, what do you think? Do you think the future is gonna end up in that direction? Like, do you see it like we're doomed to have a real world spam in our faces all the time, or what are you all seeing? What's your fears around that?
I think one positive one piece that I bring in is just about how already we're seeing the trends of advertisement shift away from what they were, say, when it was television times and you would just get the same ad in every commercial break. They're being more tailored. And of course, there's the downside of they are, because of the massive amounts of data that are being tracked with us. But I think that with content marketing being so popular too, and having actual value provided to people in exchange for their interest, I hope that is the direction we're going, because there is so much inundation that it's like you were saying earlier, like actually giving value to people in exchange for their attention. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really great one. I actually think that people, if they want your attention, they should pay you for it. And that's why I was exploring that previous project, because it's like it could be a tiny reward, but enough of those tiny rewards, and I think that might be actually significant dollars. But it's more that I want to shift the burden to the person that is that wants the party advertising. It's your time is expensive and precious, and right now you're paying for it in a sense. They're spamming you, they're eating up your time, they're costing you. The costs they're not well placed in the system. There's a hubris, I think, I don't know, kind of growing up as a privileged programmer in the Bay Area and just kind of being able to do anything and play. And that hubris, I don't know if it's healthy or not, but there's a feeling that we can make what we want. We can make the system we want. And so what we need to do is really be thoughtful about what we propose to do. How do we propose to live? How do we propose to engage with each other? What are the right choices we want to make? What should we permit? And I think that we could choose a world that's advertising free. I don't know that's a good world. We could choose a world where people that want your attention have to cut through the noise with a small amount of money. And that increasingly is possible with DeFi. I see all kinds of radical ways of thinking about energy exchanges. And although we use the word money, I prefer to think of it as like a small amount of energy that you're giving somebody. And it's a gift in exchange for their attention and time. And I think that if we think about it in those terms, think about our agency and our power, and that we're not just puppets in a system where it's beyond our control, that we have ability to help build that system, then we can look for solutions that we build together, I guess.
Oh, apologies, I was muted. I love this, and I love this conversation, because this is a lot of what Nisha and I work so hard to do with Design Reality, is that we want to bring people from such a wide breadth of experience levels and perspectives into this conversation and get people really excited about designing our reality, right? Our current system is one of middlemen often, right? Where they provide a service like, let's say, Facebook or Instagram. And we get to enjoy that service, and they get all of our data, and then they get to force these ads on us. And I think a lot of people are at this place where we're realizing that the service itself isn't actually a service that we enjoy. It doesn't actually bring us a tremendous amount of value. Psychologically, it actually can cause damage. That the service is designed to feed us things that enrage us in order to keep our attention so it can give us more ads. And really, it's funny because that really has only existed for what, like 12, 15 years now, like you're saying, the mobile phones. But it feels at this point so ingrained into how we do things.
Yeah.
It seems like what you're talking about is a big shift where we're getting rid of middlemen and advertisers, companies, because there's companies out there that want to provide things that I want. They have services or they have items that I actually, will provide value to me. And so we want to serve it. We want an ability for them to get my attention, right? But in my mind, it seems like a mountain to climb. And I do know quite literally you enjoy climbing mountains. So maybe you can tell us a bit about, like, what are your thoughts about, like, how do we climb that mountain?
So I think that honestly, as a longtime programmer, maybe I'm lucky to be able to see some of these trends, but I think it's a question I'm trying to actually collect the answers from everybody else. It's more like you tell me what to do and I'll make it. Okay, like I'm the programmer, you're the thinkers. but for me, I really like a consensus-driven process. Finding the stakeholders in the room can be very hard. It's hard to see who the people are, hard to see what their concerns are. We're very good at not seeing. I have this conference coming up, which you alluded to earlier. It's called Future of the Browser. And in that conference, I'm noticing it's a small conference, fairly specialized and highly interactive. And in that conference, what the kind of the focus is that actually the tools we may be using in the next decade, 10 years out, are probably fairly different from what we are using today. I think that we're about to see a huge transition in our tools. And what I'm looking for myself is the ideas and inspirations for what to build. What should I make? What should programmers make? And so I'm encouraging people to come together, submit lightning talks, submit ideas, join in the breakouts, and help tell us all, what should we make? What should we make for you? What should we build?
That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the reasons we love these conversations and we love our Clubhouse conversations for that exact reason, is like, we want to interact with people around these ideas and really be able to grow together in it. Right. Because I think that the old design philosophy of like, oh, there's going to be one person, maybe a small team, and whatever they create, they're going to ram it, down the throat of society. I think that more and more we're all realizing that's archaic. I mean, even with the younger generations, look at kids, they all want to make their own video games now. They don't want to just consume the entertainment. Like, that's why Roblox, just went IPO'd for how many billions of dollars, because there's this massive marketplace for kids to be content creators, to participate in the future of this stuff. So, well, can you tell us more about this, the Future of the Browser event? Like, really kind of help us understand, like, what is the topic, like who are the speakers, and what's happening there?
Oh yeah, so the conference is coming up on May 26th, which is very soon. It's Scott Jensen and Amber Case are opening with a kind of roundtable discussion, and then we have a lot of breakouts with lightning talks and inviting. Basically, it's going to be half built by the people who attend, and then we have a few speakers set up right now. It's at futureofthebrowser.web.app. We had done a previous one, which went very well. It was amazing. And the browser doesn't sometimes sound like a very exciting topic, but I think we're on the transition from a web that describes how to do something. You can look up a recipe or look up how to translate from English to French or French to English. Transition from a web that describes things to a web that does things, where you point your camera at a page and it translates for you. That there's a push for computation to move freely through the system. where you and I are going to tell stories, not with text, not with words, not with just video, but we're going to be able to make our own episodes of Star Trek that are interactive and make them up as little vignettes and then share them. And you can just go into the experience and try out the experience and have that learning of the experience experientially. Like the web is about to change radically from what we think it is. I'm going to be sending you entire like interactives as kind of thoughts. And that, it sounds fantastical, but you just look at the trends of how powerful our tools are, the shift in what's happening. The future web may not even have text, right? Like the shift is going to be that radical. It's not just they're going to shift to a world where we're looking through and seeing, but we may not even be a world of words anymore. And it's going to be a world of digital assistants and agents and virtual bots that follow us around and interact with us, or proxies for ourselves. And that's coming very quickly. And so in this conversation coming up on May 26th, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to explore, we're going to try and pretend that we're an early explorer on Mars. And we've got a Mozilla quantum elliptic Firefox, whatever, in 2032 or something like that. And we're standing there on the surface of Mars looking at a fossil, trying to figure out what it is. Like, what's that tool going to be like, right? And that's the conversation that I really want to have.
That's a really exciting one to have. And we've talked about this in the past. And I think the way you were able to describe it is you talked about, right now the browser is this app on your computer that you access information for. And it's like in the future, the browser really is more the computer, so to speak. It is the OS in some ways. Like it has that level of dynamic range for the amount of experiences it can provide.
Right.
Yeah. So super fascinating. Nisha, I know you have a question that you'd like to jump in here with.
Yeah, I really appreciated the examples because that does give it a more tangible, understanding of what this could be, what the future could be. And so I'm curious, I love the name, and how far off in the future do you think this is? As quickly as technology is moving, is this like 10, 20 years? Maybe we don't know, but I'm curious what you think about that.
I think we're within a decade of something that's very different. Right now, one of the reasons I'm doing this conference is because Huawei has asked me to build a prototype for a future browser. And when I was doing the research on that, I started to realize that what I needed to do was build a kind of computational soup, not even a browser anymore. I needed to build a thing that could fetch down agents, run those agents in a durable way. They could move around freely over the network. And I started to understand that my own understanding of what I thought of as the browser was completely obsolete. And that the future is really more about computation, not about just reading text. So I'm kind of being paid now to research the topic and maybe scavenging everyone else's brains for what should actually be done in it. I'm expecting you all to answer the question in some senses, but I think we're within a decade for things that will be very surprising to us that from where you stand today.
I mean, I think if we were to go back 10 years into the past and get an insight into where we currently stand, we'd also be pretty darn surprised with the technology we have. So it makes perfect sense that these radical changes can come in a decade. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more. Like you mentioned a couple of your speakers, Amber Case and one other. Could you tell us a little bit more about like who it is that you have speaking at this event and like what the perspectives they have and are bringing into the conversation?
Yeah. So this event is interesting because we are we're going across the board. We have some artists performing. We have an amazing artist named Tiana Garugian, and they're going to open the space with some interesting interrogation of kind of get us to think a little bit. We have Dulce, who's making some very powerful images, NFT images, and talking about how that's giving her a form of self-expression. We have Uchi Becky, who's COIL developer relations in Africa, talk about the next billion users, which is a Google term. We have an amazing speaker as well. Everyone's amazing, but this guy's an old timer who is, I'm especially interested in hearing David Smith. He worked on croquet. And for me, that's significant because it marks a transition between digital media as a medium for reading text to a medium for doing work. Croquet is a very accessible and easy to use interactive construction tool. We have, gosh, another music bit. We have Pam is doing NF-Trees, an eco NFT project initiative, which I thought was really cool. So there's quite a few things like that, and there's still room for lightning talks. And I would love to, if you have,
for those in our audience that don't know, introduce because you have Amber Case opening us as well. So
that's right. Yes.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Amber.
Amber is lucky to call her a friend. She's another Portlander with the rest of us, and she's had early insight into human relationship with technology, how we're augmented by it, maybe shaped by it. And she has a TED Talk, it's quite good, and has spoken frequently on these topics. Today, she's more focused as an artist and creative in some respects. And the conference for both of us reflects some of these are shifting. Maybe in a way we're all kind of growing up a bit, maybe a little bit less techie, a little bit more focused on implications, and maybe even spiritual in a way, even though I don't know that I'm necessarily super spiritual, but
fair enough. Well, so this is a podcast, and we might have some people listening after the conference passes.
Yeah.
Will these conversations be recorded and stored and available?
Only if the participants wish. So the main tracks, the lightning talks, and the main sessions are going to be all logged on the site, and then we have breakouts. And those breakouts, last time we didn't record the actual breakouts, although I think some of the best discussions were there. You have to be there. But the main themes, the main kind of spark points, the starting points of it will be, they'll all be online.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, yeah, for anybody that's listening, we'll have all of the information for this event, both on our website and on the bottom of this YouTube video where you're listening to this. Yeah, because I'm really looking forward to it. I'm buying my ticket today. It's going to be a great event.
Better get in there quick.
Well, before we wrap up here, I think this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. You're actually the person that invited me on Clubhouse, which is kind of what got all this started. Nisha and I both fell in love with Clubhouse and have been having a lot of fun. And occasionally I bring you up in conversation, and I always say that you're one of my friends that it feels like you're living like 10 to 15 years in the future. Every conversation we have always feels like I'm looking forward in time or something. And so, with that perspective, not to put you on the spot, but I'm curious, like what you feel like is coming our way that has you really excited and optimistic about creating the future.
I did a write-up just this last week at anselm.substack.com. It kind of summarizes where my thinking is going lately. I had an amazing conversation. Maybe this is a good wrap-up point. It's just mind-blowing, really. I had the opportunity to talk to the guy that started OpenCV, his computer vision project. His name, what's his last name? Just look it up. Gary, opencv.org, Bradsky. And he took the perspective around what happens when our farm equipment can see. This is a guy who sits at the intersection of many researchers, thousands of other researchers. And he has people in Africa looking at ants and people looking at glaciers, and they're all using his computer vision technology. And his particular take for that conversation was, just think about food food agriculture. And imagine bots crawling along our fields, plucking things out very carefully. Imagine mixed crops that can grow together where you have self-fixing crops because you don't have to separate them anymore because you don't need factory farming methods in the same way. Imagine when how labor will change when you no longer have humans out there who have to, do that. What will people do? Imagine farmers sharing their own bespoke techniques for visualizing and sharing how to prevent fungal growth on certain kinds of plants. Like he spoke about a future of computation at the edges being created locally by farmers to share with other farmers to deliver just-in-time knowledge to overturn revolutionize a pretty sick food industry. And that for me was an amazing vision of a future I hadn't considered.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because now you're taking all these technologies that you've been working on for over a decade, and you're taking them from like the experimental lab to like, okay, the startup space, trying to make business. And now we're looking at like having massive real world implications,
Right.
be able to change, like you're saying, a sick industry, with a lot of waste and inefficiency, and revolutionizing in a way that could change food systems.
Right. And the web starts to hit the real world. And this is the web, we think of it as something else, but it really is. It's going to become the way we communicate. It's going to be the tools and how we share information, real world, actionable behaviors that we share with each other that augment our abilities.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the piece that you're bringing into, a lot of times when people think of the XR technologies, they think entertainment, they think gaming. But when we bring in these different industries, from healthcare to how food is produced to construction, we see this bigger picture of really the influence of these technologies in all spheres of our day-to-day life.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing. Not to get too excited, but this is probably the beginning of the transition. We thought we were halfway through it. This might be just day one.
That's a great perspective, because I have people ask that question a lot. Like, have we already missed the boat? Has the train left the station? And I'm like, no, it's just beginning right now. Well, hey, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Really, appreciate this conversation. We're both looking forward to this one-day conference, which again, if you're listening, it's on May 26th and can be found at the futureofthebrowser.web.app.
Future of the browser.
Web.app. Okay, great. We'll have a link to that too. And then Anselm, you're also going to be joining us on Clubhouse for a deep dive conversation here soon. We're looking forward to that, and in general, just looking forward to continuing these conversations with us, or with you. So thanks for.
And just let me add, you can follow Case Organic on Twitter, and she's tweeting the conference details.
Okay, great. Case Organic. Yeah, that's Amber Case's. So perfect.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm honored to be here today.
Yeah. Nisha, any final thoughts?
Just really appreciate this conversation and your time with us. It's been very insightful and inspiring. I think that's really a big piece of why we like to have these conversations, because Joshua and I always walk away so inspired. And so thanks for taking the time with us. It's been really
nice. For bringing everyone together all the time. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you again soon. Take care.